Welcome to another edition of Minot Matters here at the Dakotan, brought to you by Shock, Safe, and Lock. We are continuing our budget chronicles. We've sat down with City Manager Harold Stewart and others, and we're continuing the conversation today with City Councilman Rob Fuller.
How you doing? I'm
doing well. This is the first time we've got to chat since you became officially a City Council member. How's that been going for you?
It's been going well. Thank you. Yeah, this is the first time I think I was in here when we did the candidate forum thing.
Yes.
But yeah, it's been going good. I mean, it's just being honest, it's different than you think it's always going to be, right?
Right.
But it's been enjoyable. It's been a learning experience, and we got some work ahead of us.
Finally, you have something to do every other Monday night.
Yeah, right. Nothing else going on.
If your life wasn't busy enough before. Process for the budget, though, started before you became a city council member, and maybe even before you were considering running for council, because it started back in April, technically.
February was my kickoff date when they bailed out Broadway Circle.
That's right. Okay, sounds good. So right around that time, then, how difficult has it been getting caught up on all the budget stuff?
Well, difficult might not be the right word, but I mean, it's been challenging. Obviously, I have a lot going on in some of my other parts of my life too, so I've had to dedicate a fair amount of time to reading over the budget, trying to understand it, going through line items and trying to figure out why we're doing this here or why we're spending this here. So, I mean, it's a challenge because it's a big budget, it's a big document, and there's a lot there to digest.
Anything that has stood out to you as you've gone through the entire process? Not the budget. We'll talk about the budget specifically, but as you've gone through the process, went on the budget tours as a potential or as a candidate, been part of the budget retreat and stuff like that. Anything specifically that stood out to you?
Well, there's two things. I think number one, we have wonderful people that work for our city. We really do. They work hard. So I don't ever want anybody that works for the city to think that, hey, the three new members that were all elected are here to burn it all down, because we're not, right?
Right.
So that's one. We got great employees working for the city. The second thing that has stood out to me, though, more than anything, we're always trying to compare ourselves to somebody else. We don't want to just be Minot and do things the way Minot does things. We want to do things the way Fargo's doing it, or Grand Forks is doing it, or Bismarck is doing it. And to me, as a resident of Minot, that makes zero sense.
Right.
If we're going to do things, let's do them the way we need to do them, not just the way Fargo, who has 4 times our revenue, does it,
right,
or Bismarck, who has double our revenue, does it. We don't need to compare ourselves to that. And, when I say that, one of the things we keep hearing, or I keep hearing, well, we'll lose employees. Well, I don't ever want to lose employees. But if somebody makes the decision that, hey, Bismarck pays better. Yeah, I've been in Minot 15 years. I own my house here. I work at a city job that I've worked at over 10 years. I have a fantastic benefits package. But I'm going to go to Bismarck for $5,000 more a year. That's what a free market economy is. And that's what we need to do.
Right.
I am not advocating in any way, shape, or form that I want people to leave our employment within the city of Minot. But the chasing our tail all the time to be something we're not is very stressful to me. I don't think we need to be doing that.
Right. It's an interesting topic right there, is about employee retention. And it seems like there's a huge emphasis that I say the city, but I'm not really calling out even city manager on this, because we had a good conversation with him about this particular topic. But there's so much emphasis at the city council meetings, and so inwardly you'd anticipate it's other places too, about pay.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're talking about a career, not a job, but a career, how important is pay to you? Culture has to be important.
Right.
Stability has to be important.
Absolutely.
All those other things.
Where you work, who you work with, and what you do are the 3 most important things to every job. And again, I've worked at jobs where I was paid really well, And I hated it there because I didn't like the culture. And I've worked at jobs where I was probably underpaid, but I would have stayed there because I liked the people I worked with. I liked how the operation was run.
Right.
And so pay, on my scale, at least for me personally, pay is probably third, fourth, or fifth on the list.
Yeah.
And here's another thing too. And just having said that, with government jobs, okay, government jobs, and I don't care if you're talking federal, state, or local, government jobs have always been normally a little underpaid,
Right.
but your benefits package, your retirement, your pension, all of that is platinum, which we offer here in the city of Minot.
Yep.
So now on top of that, we're also probably the best paying entity in the city of Minot. We are stifling hiring at small businesses and other places because we're willing to pay somebody so much more than they're willing to go over here and work for this guy. I have a hard time with that again, because again, we want good employees. And that's where I think the merit-based system should come in. But anyway, we want good employees, but we don't want to hire away from the local businesses and the people that are supporting us.
Right.
So they can't find employees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's an interesting discussion. It'd be interesting. We do these city surveys for the citizens of Minot.
Another survey?
Oh, but we should do one for the employees. We should ask them why they stay. We should see what actually matters to them, because maybe not. Another survey. I get it. We do perhaps too many of them, and maybe some of them are even skewed. But it would be interesting to see what matters most to them. Is it getting the step in pay increase and making sure their wages are increased to what the market says it should be, or is it the culture? Is it the benefits, which is already platinum? What is it that keeps them there? But before we jump into pay plans, it feels like, and I've said it, and maybe I'm wrong on this, but it feels like city manager has done he's made it a priority to make this budget process, very transparent and open to the public. And I know that there's probably still things that can be done. I'm not saying that. But a lot of the outcry from citizens is always, hey, all this stuff happens and we don't know about it. I'm not talking about all the other decisions, the Broadway Circle that just you show up to council and that's a done deal, or other things that it seems like there's a lot more public outcry about. I'm talking about just the budget. Do you feel like this has been a pretty transparent process so far? Going forward a couple of weeks, there's some virtual meetings that people can jump on their lunch hour to go and state their opinions to city department leaders and stuff like that. How do you feel like that process has gone? Maybe that's putting you on the spot. But
No, not at all. I'll commend Harold with what he's done, starting with a zero-based budgeting system and the way they looked at it this year. I think that's a first good step. I think it's been more transparent, but I don't think it's been completely as transparent as maybe we would like it to be. There's still a lot of line items and things in there that I'm guessing the normal person in the community that doesn't have time, effort to jump into and deal with it doesn't understand. I mean, heck, prior to sitting down and reading through our budget, there was things that I thought I understood that I didn't understand, and now I have a better view of it. So I don't know if it will ever be as transparent as we want it to be. They're doing a good job, I think, with trying to be transparent.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things there though that it are hard to understand, and so transparency and that don't normally go hand in hand.
I think probably the word that I should have better used is accessible, because it feels like everything is very accessible. You can the budget tours and the making everyone available.
That I'll agree with 100%. I mean, they've made a priority for us to understand, and I say us, the three new guys. What did Chief Kelly call us? What did she call us? Council babies or something like that? New guys. But anyway, they've made it very accessible. Like you said, we can go talk to all the department heads. They've given us tours, even past the budget tours. This morning I spent 2 hours with fire. We spent 2 hours at the airport, spent an hour with municipal court. So, I mean, we've had a lot of good quality access to the people to be able to ask our questions and get the information that we need.
You enjoy that part? Do you enjoy
I love it?
Yeah.
I mean,
to a degree, obviously.
To a degree. I know they're busy.
Yeah.
I know we're, Mike and myself and Scott, we're all busy. Me less so anymore.
Yeah.
But, so I feel bad when I say bad, that might be the wrong word, but I feel bad that they have to take all that time out of their day,
right?
Because again, they all have things to do, and I know that. But yeah, it's been nice to be able to talk to them.
Yeah, for sure. Going back to the transparency, one of the things that was brought up multiple times at the special meeting for the budget with the department leaders was consultants. And obviously that's something that's been brought up before that meeting, but there were specific questions that were asked at that meeting. And it was interesting how when you're talking about the airport and their parking, how their parking is set up, they have a percentage-based fee based off either cars or however it works that go to their parking system. And all that's a consultant when it's literally a service that's being provided. It's not a consultancy. Right. And it was interesting to see all the different things that are included in consultants, which decreases like your fury at why are we spending this much money on consultants, though there's still maybe a concern there, but that it's actually being services that just there's no transparency provided with it.
Well, and that's, if you look at the last meeting, at the special budget meeting, and I asked Lance, I said, help me understand what these $300,000 in consultants are. And he went down the list. And I was like, okay, some of that in my mind makes sense. You need to budget for that. And that's, I think I turned to Harold and I said, hey, can we get that list from each department, so we have an understanding.
When I saw his answer to that question, I was like, he was happy to help, I'm sure, but he did not seem excited about that request.
I would agree with that. I
probably a lot of legwork there.
Like, oh yeah, I get another thing we got to find for these guys. No, I don't have so much trouble. I mean, some of the things in the budget that are listed as consulting, like the money that we give the EDC to run the Magic Fund, that's listed as a consulting fee, right? So I think if you take some of the numbers, where I have the issue with the consulting fee, let's take the wage survey. Every 2 or 3 years, we run a wage survey to see if we're competitive. I'm done paying people to tell us what we are. Right. Let's be Minot and let's make our own minds up, right? We'll find out in a hurry if we're underpaying or overpaying, right? That's, again, a free market economy. That's how that's determined.
Right.
I don't need to pay somebody $50,000 every 3 years to come in and say, yeah, you're behind Grand Forks and Fargo and Bismarck. Well, of course we are. We're smaller than all of them. We should be behind them, And so that's where I have so much issue with consultants. I don't mind that if we need to hire an attorney with some expertise to look at something for us, that's perfectly fine. Some of the stuff that Lance brought up, with migrating data for the computer systems and all those things, that's perfectly fine. It's some of the wasteful ones, that really eat at me.
Makes sense. As you have gone to this, you're the new face on council. We've talked about that. Has there been a lot of people reaching out to you? Maybe they feel like, hey, new person, new ideas. Maybe he'll be more vocal at this point, reaching out, showing support or opposition to some of these budget decisions that have been coming down.
I have not had any opposition yet, other than to say, like, I had a gentleman the other day email all of us, but he said, don't buy an electric bus. I mean, that was, but I personally, I get a ton of emails, and quite a few phone calls, or I'll see somebody out in public, like somebody I don't even know. I was at the liquor store one day buying a 6-pack or 12-pack of beer. And he goes, hey, I like what you guys are doing on city council. And I was like, oh yeah, that's right. I'm on city council, right? And so, I mean, I believe we have a lot of support in the community because people, as Alderman Blessum said, people are fed up. They're strapped. They can't do this anymore. And if you don't have these checks and balances in there, I mean, just go back for the last 10 years. Our budget, our staff, our everything has just grown exponentially. Well, here we are, tied up with flood control and NAS into perpetuity, honestly, in my opinion. I don't know. NAS is a 20-year project that we're still going to be paying on in the next 3 to 5 years. But until some of those things go away and we can reuse those sales tax pennies, we don't have any more property tax money that we're going to be able to take out of this community. We honestly don't. People cannot afford what we've been doing.
Yeah, that's important to look at. In our interview with city manager, he mentioned that most communities wouldn't be able to sustain the 2 large projects that we have ongoing right now with NAS and flood protection. And that's something that's really probably more attention should be drawn to. Like, we're doing a lot. And so one of the things we have on our list to ask about is Legacy City Hall receiving no funds this budget and how that breaks down. But it should be looked at too. Like, no, we can't do that until we get rid of one of these other things.
Well, and that's a great question. I mean, the PD has some issues and they need some new facilities.
Right.
How do we attack that project and help them out without going and paying $50 million or $60 million for a new police department? Well,
right.
Luckily, we have a lot of money sitting in our cash reserves
right.
that I think we could probably have a budget meeting on and make an amendment and move some of those to take care of that legacy project. So I think we'll see that, and you'll see it be talked about and start to be addressed before the year is over. So
I'm jumping all around with my questions, but sticking on this, and I've gotten a couple different opinions on this. And we're most likely going to, in the budget as it sits right now, most likely there'll be $700,000 in monies that comes available because of the pay plan that's chosen. And we'll talk about the pay plan specifically, but most likely the $2.3 million version of that pay plan is not going to be accepted. And that's what's in the budget. It'll most likely be reduced to the 1.6 million option, and maybe even differently. But that would free up $700,000. Do you see that money going towards, in a larger discussion with maybe even those reserves or something, going towards the Legacy City Hall? Do you see something happening as soon as in this budget, or is that going to be something that's going to be taken care of down the road? That money not even be taken, that money be given back to the people? That's a hard question.
That's tough because
it goes beyond you.
Well, it does. I mean, if it was just up to me, obviously, there's an answer there. But I think there has to be a high-level discussion and then an in-depth discussion on the PD and how we want to handle that and how much we're going to throw at it. So instead of just taking that $700,000 and throwing it against the wall or putting it in a fund and just letting it sit there. Again, I'm going to say the same thing as Alderman Blessum. Let's give that money back, and when we figure out the PD, let's work from there, right? I don't think that the $700,000 in wages is going to be the only lowering point in this budget, to be honest with you. Yeah. So
there you go. Hey, we'll look forward to that. All right. You mentioned somebody reached out to you about an electric bus. Don't do the electric bus. Obviously, this was brought up one of the last points at that special budget meeting with the department leader. His first name is Brian. I can't pronounce his last name, so I'm sorry, Brian, but we'll
he's a very good dude.
Yeah, he is.
I've had a couple conversations outside of even that that night
discussion.
So
federal funding though being brought in, and it's forcing the city into not being able to purchase a diesel bus essentially if they want the federal funding. If they go hybrid or electric, they'll get potentially up to 85%. Now, some people are saying that's not guaranteed in itself. We're going to have the hook tied to us as long as we have the bus. What if federally they change something in the program? What if, whatever happens? How should the city go about when they're going and looking at these things and federal funding's involved? How heavy should that federal funding push our decision one way or another?
In my opinion, it shouldn't. We need to get away from the federal funding. Right now, we're like a kid addicted to federal funding, and we go back all the time, and I'm gonna use the retention ponds on 16th Street,
Okay.
right? Here's a $30 million project. Hey, the feds will give us $23 million to go build these 2 retention ponds. Let's do it. Okay, great. Where are we getting the $7 million from, guys, that we have to come up with?
Right.
That's always, like, we call it the hook. Well, that's always the hook. The Fed wants you to do this, but you always have to come up with a portion of your own. And usually then there's things that you have to do into a certain time frame, whether that's 5, 10, 15 years. Let's use the bus. For 15 years, we have to use that bus the way they tell us to use that bus. And if we don't, then we have to pay back a prorated portion of what they gave us. Why? If you look nationally, there's been the push for the electric vehicles through the federal government, right? Well, now here we are, 3-4 years after they started that big push, and multiple huge companies are going away from electric vehicles. Was it Hertz? They sold over half of their fleet of electric vehicles. Ford and some of the other major auto manufacturers said, hey, we're pulling back on producing electric vehicles because the demand isn't there yet. So my mentality goes, oh, hey, look, this nationally is going the opposite way. Why are we looking to go that way just because they'll give us a bunch of money?
Yeah.
So I have a real problem with that.
Do you see additional costs being because of the electric bus, because of a hybrid bus?
Absolutely. I mean, almost, and again, I know it's not fully electric, so I know there's a difference between the fully electric and the hybrid buses. Yep. The hybrid buses, as Brian and I talked that night, the hybrid buses still have batteries in them that need to be replaced. There's some other, and again, this is just high-level research, just typing into Google on my own part, but there's some things with the hybrid buses that you have to maintain and worry about that our mechanics and our people don't have any training on it, at least I would guess right now.
Yeah.
And so, again, while it's wonderful that somebody will give you a bunch of money to go buy something they want you to buy, is it the right thing for us in Minot? I don't think it is, honestly.
And this is an off-the-cuff question. You might not have the answer, but are there many service providers that we currently use or that would be in our area that service hybrid buses? I have not seen a lot of them around. And that, because I go back to the truck purchase. Well, we're going to buy these trucks and the Wesleys will service them. That's great. We keep the money local. But if we get a hybrid bus when there is a major deal that our mechanics can't take care of, what's the process to getting that fixed? Is that something you can bring it somewhere local, or are we going to Fargo or
Minneapolis?
Beyond?
Yeah. I don't know the answer to that question, honestly. I think you're right. I don't think there's a lot of local support for electric type things, whether it be hybrid electric or full electric. We certainly don't have the infrastructure to be charging everything, do we?
We do not currently. So that will be some interesting, I'm sure, discussion that we'll get to hear over the coming weeks. Pay plan. This was a big deal. All right. Let me jump back for a minute. First off, before we jump into the pay plan, what's your overall view of the budget that's presented as we currently see it right now? Just first take on it.
I think it's a lot. A 14.3% increase over our last year's operating budget. If Bismarck doesn't raise their budget, we'll actually have a higher budget to operate Minot, North Dakota than Bismarck will.
We finally going to be like Bismarck.
Right. Perfect. Yeah. Except they don't have flood control and NOS going on. So in my opinion right now, looking at it, over the course of the last month, and that's why I've asked the question a couple times, how much of this is pass-through income and how much is on the residents here in Minot? Because I think that's important. Mm-hmm. We're asking for a $28 million increase. And having said that, we're lowering the mills and absorbing the increase in assessed values. Isn't it fine? Doesn't anybody find it odd that we have that money just floating around in our budget? That we can now just play with it and do something else with it without increasing anything?
We've doubled the amount of reserves that we're using this year, which is really interesting.
Yeah. So having looked at it like that over the course of the last month, I think it's a big budget, and I think there's areas where we can trim and cut or prune, as Harold likes to use that term, prune things, and get it down even more.
Is there anything that you feel like is missing from the budget?
No, I think they covered it all.
I had a feeling the answer might go like that. So what's going in? I don't know. There's got to be some excitement in the budget somewhere. Are there any things that are like, hey, I'm glad this is being addressed in the budget, or not really?
Let me think for a second.
Oh no.
I guess no. I wouldn't say when I look.
People are still getting paid.
Yeah, everybody's getting paid.
Yeah.
Insurance and banking fees have gone through the roof. I didn't look at anything and go, hey, I'm glad that's being addressed, because my bigger concern, I think, right now is about the things that need to be addressed that I believe we've been doing in an inefficient way. Yeah,
that's fair. All right, let's jump to the pay.
Okay.
This was some good discussion that was had at that meeting. So you're a fan of merit. Now, we had discussion on merit pay, okay? And the definition that we were given by City Manager Harold Stewart was merit is essentially what we have now. And that is, because of your merit of working here 4 years, you automatically get your 17 steps to a max amount of income of working at the city. And then you have the pay for performance, which is you have an annual review, and based off that annual review is determining of how much of a raise that you get, essentially.
Okay.
So with those definitions, and I'm not saying that those are the right definitions, but for the sake of the podcast and trying to keep all the lingo the same, that's what I'm going to work with.
Okay.
Is that fair?
Sounds good to me. That's not what I was told, but it sounds good to me.
So I'm sorry.
No.
So you have been a fan of basically implementing a process that people are paid based off of what they've accomplished or based off how they're working. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, it's just a question I brought up. Why aren't we looking at it that way? Everything else in the world is looked at that way. You know, I mean, we all know that tenure, and I know there's not tenure within the city, right? Using that terminology, we all know that tenure leads to complacency. Thank you very much. You're finishing my...
Yeah.
So, you know, again, I don't want to take away anything from the people that work for the city of Minot.
Right.
Okay. They work hard. They do good jobs. But I think if you go out into the community and you ask everybody in the community that works somewhere, does a job, have you been given raises over the last 4 years the way that city employees have been given raises? I think as a whole, you're going to hear, no, we haven't. That money isn't out there. And I mean, small businesses don't have that money.
Right.
Right. You know, everything in this world, everything in our country is merit-based, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't care what you do. School, if you do well, you proceed on. If you don't, you get held back.
Right.
The military, if you do well, you get promoted. If you don't, they force retire you.
Right.
Show me something where it isn't merit-based, and I'll sit down and talk with you about it and look at it. But the simple fact that you can work for a place, and again, I probably wouldn't have as big a deal with it if they weren't giving out as much money as they're giving out.
Yeah.
You know, if you want to do 3 to 6% cost of living raises as a annual thing, and then there's some merit stuff on top of it, I could see that.
Yeah.
But when we're handing out, in addition to pay wages, increases in benefits and everything else, and again, I know on your podcast the other night, on Thursday night, Alderwoman Lisa Olson jumped in and said, hey, there was a revision to that. It's only 21%.
Right.
Well, while I understand that, they said because a number of people have been hired over those 4 years. Well, okay, let's take a look at the number of people that have been hired. There are people making over 6 figures that have been hired. And when they're getting raises, they're getting big raises on top of that, right? So a 15% raise to somebody making $100,000 is $15,000.
Yeah.
So while I understand that, they have been given significant raises over the course of those 4 years. Again, deserved, but we're giving out too much money. And the only way to pay for that is through the taxpayers paying up more.
Right. Yeah. Still 21% is a pretty substantial amount.
That 21% was just the wages, though. That doesn't include the benefits.
Doesn't include the
package,
benefits.
Which is another 10 to 11%.
And I don't quote me on this. This is top of my head, and I haven't followed city council meetings as close as I should have, like 2 or 3 years ago. But there have been substantial changes with that of how much the employees have had to pay in too.
Yeah.
I believe it's decreased over that time, the amount that the employees have had to pay in.
I believe you're right.
And their wages have increased. So that's a net gain for the employees as well, which we're thankful for the employees. It's always awkward talking about that, but it is what it is. It's city business. So this is, and I think we kind of already talked about it, but this is the main driver in it. Whenever we talk about pay, it's the main driver of this is how we're going to retain employees. Mm-hmm. If that's really the case, is there something wrong?
Absolutely. If you have to be the highest paid business to keep an employee, you're not doing something right. And that seems to be their argument all the time when we start. And when I say their argument, I mean some of the upper city management folks. We'll lose employees. That's what a free market economy does. We can't be the best paid and the best benefits package. As you can see, and as Lisa Junt has said in that meeting, it's not sustainable. And she's been saying that for 2 years. If it's not sustainable, why are we still doing it?
Right. How concerning, when you hear that, how concerning is that to you?
That's very concerning. Like if Lisa goes to the city manager and says, hey, what we're doing is not sustainable, why aren't we adjusting and making an alternate figure to what we're going to do?
Right. Yeah. The pays, you going to endorse any one of the pay plans? No. You'll wait for the discussion.
I have a couple different ideas in my head. Like, here's the thing. Fire and PD, essential services, pay them. Give it all to them. Right. Give them both the merit and the step and everything else that they deserve, because those guys are out there busting their butts and doing everything for the public every day.
With their life on the line.
Yep. Some of the other, the boots on the ground people, I think we have to come up with a fair plan for them. And then some of the other ones in middle and higher management, I think we need to look at that accordingly too, because, and again, I'm not picking on anyone, right? But I got elected because folks in this town don't believe the city was being run right.
Yeah.
So do the senior management people, if the city hasn't been being run effectively that the city community believes, do they need a 12%? 14% raise? I mean, again, and that sounds harsh. I'm not trying to be harsh, and I'm not pointing to anyone in particular, but I believe, me personally, that we need to look at each group individually, right? We need to look at upper management, because that's how it's done in the corporate world.
That's good. You
need to look at upper management. You need to look at the people that are making you your money, and you need to look at the people that are doing public service as far as PD and fire. You got to look at those three things individually. You can't say everybody across the board is the same.
Yeah. So there's no place for if the consensus is there's no place for a pay plan that pays based off of what you've done. It seems like you could at least have that implemented with your leaders.
Well, absolutely.
Because if your leaders are if their raise is based on how well their department does, then they're going to fire some employees if they're not performing.
Absolutely. I mean, and again, that's, and I think you hear this all throughout government, federal, state, local. It's harder than heck to get rid of an employee that isn't doing anything. Yeah. I mean, we've had a couple of those instances in our past, and I believe we're still paying some of them. Yeah. So why wouldn't we go to a merit-based system? I mean, I've been through merit-based systems in every aspect of my banking career. If I didn't perform well, I wouldn't get a raise and I wouldn't get promoted. Right. I used to do the same thing at my business. If my people were performing and doing what I needed them to do, I would give them a raise. If they weren't, or in the economy, like take right after 2020, 2021, there wasn't money to be given out, right? People weren't spending. I mean, there was supply chain issues. There was all kinds of things. So there's a lot of things that make that up and then have to have that decision instead of just saying, hey, you've been here 6 years, here's 10%.
Right. That's crazy. So basically what I'm hearing is there's a chance that there might be another option that's presented, even than what is already on the table.
Absolutely. I think there's
room for that.
Good chance that there might be a couple different plans or a couple different ideas brought up that say, hey, let's try or look at something like this instead.
Yeah. So two interesting things that was brought up this year for the budget was the zero-based budget approach, which you mentioned already, and the multiple year approach to the budget. Do you see those concepts as being beneficial and things that should be continuously implemented?
Well, absolutely. Most private entities, right? They budget on a 1 to 3 year plan saying, hey, this is what I want to see, or this is what we need to do. I think that's a good idea for the city. First of all, I think the zero-based budgeting on an annual basis is ideal. And we have to do that because it makes you start from a 0 point instead of every year going, hey, this is where we were last year. Let's just add this percentage and we'll keep going.
Yeah.
Because, and you'll see that in this year's budget. If you go back and compare it to last year's budget, which I've done a lot of, you'll see huge drops in this, this line item and huge spikes in this line item. And so you have to question, well, why did we need that last year? And now we don't need it this year.
Yeah.
But we moved it over here into this, so I think the zero-based budgeting puts a lot of accountability into the process. Now, having said that, I did see one thing on your slides you got put up on this Thursday night meeting, where it was lined through, but it's actually in the budget. So they'd said they crossed it off and it's in our budget. So
yikes.
I went back and I was like, oh, we're going to have to talk about this.
Yeah.
But now going forward to the multi-year plan, I think that's fantastic because, again, and you don't ever have any idea what's going to go on federally and everything else. But I think looking at things over multiple years is the best way to do it because we could say, hey, we know the next 2 years at least are going to be pretty lean. Because federally that's what's going on. So we have to budget accordingly. Right. And where does that help us? That helps us if all of a sudden next year everything is roses again in the world and the economy, and then we're under budget. We're like, look at all the excess we have, or what we could do with. So I think they're both great ideas, and I think it's something that we need to continue into the future. Yeah,
it seems like you could plan way better. Absolutely. It was almost surprising when I heard that we were doing it.
I'm sure it was because we've done it the other way for so long. Nobody ever knew there was another way to do it.
Right. Yeah. But even from my perspective, it was like, well, it's almost like you just expect that to happen.
Most people with a modicum of common sense would be like, hey, that's the way it should be done.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
But it wasn't the way it was done.
Which is interesting. One of those things where it's just, if you go back through history, you'll find them. Hindsight is probably, we need more foresight for sure.
Absolutely.
There's a $28 million increase in this budget. Some of it's expected. I say expected because of the specific line item, but there's probably other things that could be removed out, which would have decreased a budget. But when you look at on the city's presentation, when you look at it, the items that were saying this is why there's a $28 million increase. Some of them were things that we had money for, that we were paying for, and it was just coming down the pipe. That's what I mean by expected. And then some of it's personnel costs and things like that. What is your thoughts on the $28 million budget increase? Is it all right?
I think it's excessive.
Yeah.
Honestly, I mean, just my opinion. But I think it's excessive. I mean, a 14% increase in budget is a lot of money year over year to run a city. And again, you can go and look at other people's budgets, other cities' budgets. And I know we have flood control and NAS going on, and a good portion of our budget is being increased by that. But let's take the 28 million. How much of that is flood and NAS? Let's say it's 60%. Okay. Mm-hmm. 60% of our new $28 million is going to be because of that. And so it's probably federal pass-through income or state pass-through income. Yep. But what's that number real quick? So 28 times 60, let's see, 112, about 15 million, give or take. Yep. So 15 million of the 28 million is pass-through. That means 13 million isn't.
Right.
13 million is on us here in the city. And, you know, so there's things in there that I believe we can still cut out to get that number down. I mean, imagine if we can float $13-15 million without raising property tax. Do you think our budget is a little heavy? I mean, you know, if we can just move this around without increasing anything, that should be kind of a red flag to everybody in the community going, well, hold on. They're not raising our taxes. They're eating the assessed value increase of all of our homes. How do they have the money to do this?
Right.
You know, so that's kind of where I sit on it right now. Does that answer your question?
It answers the question. I'm going to follow it up with this.
Okay.
Is there anything specifically that, and I'll preface it with this, wayfinding signs gone. Well, mostly. There's still a little bit. And probably the part, in my opinion, the part that we're doing this year is in that whole area the most important out of anything that we did. Because I think there are entrance signs. I don't think every once in a while there's any problem with spending money on those. Putting signs up all around town. I know it's for the visitors. That's a different discussion. But, you know, it's good to have a good first impression.
Are our entrance signs into the city poor?
I think I don't know that they're poor. I think the only thing that could be said is they're not consistent. And one of them might not be able to be seen very well.
You need to cut the grass around them. I know that.
Yeah, probably. So, but they probably don't need updated at all. But if we were going to have that conversation, if it was like, we're going to do this, that'd be the only thing that I would see as being a necessity compared to anything else. So that's cut. Anything else that you think should find its way out of the budget?
Oh, there's a number of things I think should find their way out of the budget. You know, one of the things I've been asking about, if you looked at the budget, there's a 75% increase in insurance rates for covering buildings and their contents, and about a 76% increase in credit card fee and banking fees. Again, you can't cut those out of the budget, but we need to need to be shopping that. We need to send out RFPs or RFQs. So that stuff needs to happen.
How? And I understand that, like, I don't have as much money as the city does, obviously, but how are we spending that much on banking fees?
Well, that's a great question. Now, when I asked
credit card
the question,
processing,
I was told that a lot of it or most of it is credit card processing fees. But we're changing credit card processing companies because I believe some of our software only works with some of them. And so that kind of limits us. But having said that, from the banking perspective, I know that when a city banks with a bank, they don't pay any fees, right? They put up earnings credits. You get earnings credits for your deposits. Banks want city money there because it's a lot of money, and then they can lend it out, and it's basically free. They're not paying to get it, and they're giving earnings credits to offset it. So I don't think if we're paying any banking fees right now, I'd be like, change banks, right? And I was told there's going to be an RFQ out for banking stuff. There needs to be the same thing though for credit card processing fees. And I'm not one of the guys that's going to say, hey, let's go to the zero credit card processing fees where we pass all that on to the customer, right? I know a lot of small businesses have done that, but we have enough processing ability that I think we can get some better rates and fees if we push back. Same thing with the insurance, right? I mean, I realize insurance in this country is a mess right now, and it's going crazy weird all over the place. But again, I shop my insurance every 2 years. You probably do the same thing. Why do we do that? Because that's the only way you can get the best rates all the time. Your insurance company, whoever you're with, is going to go through some kind of stress thing nationally, which is going to increase your rates. So then you got to go talk to the guys that didn't go through that nationally. So anyway,
you know, what's an interesting thing about that too is sometimes, and maybe it depends on your agent, maybe that's what some agents would say, but even within the same, your insurance company you already have, just the fact that you are being aware of what your rates are, they'll be like, yeah, you don't need to be paying that, and they'll give you a reduction right there.
Absolutely. I mean, most times if you call, they'll give you a price break.
Right, yeah, exactly. And so follow-up question, how often should the city be requesting doing these RFQs or RFPs for bank and insurance?
Every 2 years.
Every 2 years.
Every 2 years, absolutely. Especially as rates, I mean, for banks, especially as rates are changing, up, down, whatever, you need to be moving your money around. And I know I think we use a couple,
It's
maybe
probably a good
3
thing.
different banks, but
Yeah.
we shouldn't be paying any fees. And credit cards, we probably process hundreds of millions of dollars a year.
You'd think a ton.
In credit card fees, for water, for everything else. We should be getting the best rates. I mean, and I just talking about that a little bit in my business, most people were paying around 2.7 to 3% to process credit cards. Well, there's specialty processors out there in the gun industry that go through the NRA and you get a discount. I was paying a flat rate of 1.8% across the board. There's similar things out there for cities,
right?
And you just have to go find it.
Yep.
Right. So,
yeah, we have this RF request for proposal process, and it was interesting when it came out with the trucks. That was Wesley's was the only local company.
Yep.
And so how are these proposals being sent out? Why is Wesley's the only local company that submitted, unless if we're specifically asking for 4 trucks and no other local company can provide that? Like that'd be the only way out on that. But that's interesting.
Well, and here's one of the things, I agree with you. Like why, and I think I asked that question, why aren't we getting more local people to apply? And I had some people answer me after I asked that question at a council meeting. And they said, because, and I'm, in my business, I did the same thing. So, you knew the city wasn't going to go with you. So you didn't waste the time and effort to put it out there because you knew they were going someplace else out of state. And we had requests for ammo from the PD all the time. And towards the end, I knew they were always going to buy from strikers over in Iowa or Illinois or wherever.
Yep.
And the last time I just said, I'm not even going to put a bid out for you because they're required to get so many bids, but they'll never use the local people.
Yeah.
And so I have an issue with that.
Right.
You already heard me talk about that.
Yes. No, it's an interesting deal that should be addressed. Well, this is interesting. I think we have some fun things to look forward to in some of the upcoming budget meetings.
Well, I think we do. There's going to be a lot of talk. I think Mayor Ross put out a letter to the city the other day and talked about the budget process and encouraged people to get out there. I would tell everybody, go to the meetings, come listen to the questions, come listen to the concerns and voice your own concerns. I think there's still a group within the council that wants to give the city everything that they ask for. Mm-hmm. And while I think that's a novel concept when we are flush with money, when we don't have the money to do it, I think we need to take a little more prudent stance and say, hey, right now is not the right time, and let's table this and look at it in the future.
Right.
You keep hearing people on the council say, hey, we want to be transparent and we want to hear from the constituents when it works for us, but we don't want to hear from them on other things. Sorry. Anyway.
That's a good conversation maybe for another time. But you do say one thing in that statement, and it's when we're flush with money and when we're not. What is the definition of when a city is flush with money?
Well, that isn't sitting on a bunch of reserves like we're sitting on. I don't mean that. I mean when our sales tax pennies and our property tax dollars are being gobbled up by everything we're doing right now. We don't have money to do any more big projects, any more long-term things. Let's get some of those other things off the board, and then we can look at doing the other stuff. That's what I consider to be a city flush with money. Right.
That makes sense. Well, some important dates coming up. Virtual forum for Minot citizens is happening August 14th to 16th. My understanding this is going to happen over the lunch hour. You as a citizen can just tune in, ask questions of department leaders. The city has identified the different department leaders that'll be on the certain days. And then the next thing that we get to look forward to that you'll be present for sure is on August 19th when Council President goes forward with his budget message. That should be an interesting meeting. We'll look forward to that one.
Absolutely. I hope Mark is sharpening his pencil and lining some items out. So
there we go. Well, thank you for joining us today.
absolutely. Thank you for having me.
And thank you for watching this episode of Minot Matters. As we continue with our Budget Chronicles series, be sure to follow us on Facebook, like and subscribe on YouTube as we continue to put out this content for the city of Minot. Thank you for watching this, and have a great day.